There is a question that sounds like something a child would ask, and that is exactly why it is worth taking seriously tonight. What if the asteroid had missed? Not grazed, not struck at a slightly different angle. What if the rock, the one that arrived 66 million years ago from somewhere out in the asteroid belt, traveling at roughly 20 kilometers per second, had simply passed us by? What if the trajectory had been a few degrees different, a few seconds different, and the thing had slipped past the Earth the way so many others have, silently, invisibly, on its way to somewhere else entirely? What if the sky over what is now the Yucatan Peninsula had stayed clear that morning? What if the shallow tropical sea had remained undisturbed? What if the world had simply continued? It sounds like a fantasy, but it is, in the most precise scientific sense, a question with real answers. Because we know what the world looked like before that moment. We know what was living in it, and where, and how. We know, from the fossil record, from the geochemistry of ancient sediments, from the study of living dinosaur descendants, something real and substantive about what a continued Mesozoic world would have faced. And one of the most interesting things it would have faced, had it survived long enough, was the same thing that has shaped every creature alive on this planet today. Cold, advancing ice, the slow, grinding, inexorable return of the glaciers. Because here is what almost nobody thinks about when they imagine a world where dinosaurs survived. The ice ages were not a human-era phenomenon. They were not caused by the asteroid, or by the mammals that rose afterward. They are a feature of this planet, written into its orbital mathematics, its volcanic history, its continental arrangement. The ice was always coming. The question was only ever who would be alive when it arrived. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I am always curious to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights if you have not already, take a deep breath, and let the modern world fade away. The world that existed in the final days before the asteroid impact was not the jungle-covered hothouse that most people picture when they think of the age of dinosaurs. That picture belongs to an earlier time, to the Jurassic, to the lush, oxygen-rich centuries when the great sauropods moved through forests so dense the sky was a broken puzzle of green. The late Cretaceous, the period that ended 66 million years ago, was already a world in transition. The climate had been cooling for millions of years before the asteroid arrived. The polar regions, which had been largely ice-free for most of the Mesozoic, were beginning to develop seasonal ice. The vast shallow seas that had split the North American continent down the middle, the western interior seaway, were slowly retreating as sea levels fell. The world was already changing. The asteroid did not arrive at the peak of Mesozoic stability. It arrived at the end of a long and complex decline. This is important to understand because it changes how we think about the question. A world where dinosaurs survived the asteroid is not a world frozen in amber at the peak of Cretaceous splendor. It is a world that was already being tested, already responding, already in the middle of shifts that would have continued regardless of what arrived from space. The dinosaurs that survived in our imagined scenario would have inherited a planet on the move. They would have had to adapt. And some of them, the evidence strongly suggests, were already doing exactly that. To understand what would have happened, we need to understand what was already happening. We need to feel the weight of the late Cretaceous world, its textures and its tensions, before we follow the thread of possibility into the deep future that never was. Close your eyes for a moment and try to feel it. The Maastrichtian, the final age of the Cretaceous, roughly 66 to 72 million years ago. You are standing somewhere in what will one day be Western North America. The landscape around you is nothing like what you know. The Rocky Mountains are younger and smaller than they will become. The Great Plains do not yet exist in any recognizable form. What lies before you is a coastal lowland, warm and humid, threaded with rivers running east toward the retreating inland sea. The vegetation is extraordinary. Flowering plants, angiosperms, the group that will eventually come to dominate every continent, are spreading rapidly. Ferns and cycads still crowd the forest floor. Conifers tower over everything. The air smells of wet earth and something green and ancient. Something your nose has no word for because nothing quite like it exists anymore. And moving through this landscape, in ways that have become almost cliché because they are so hard to make feel real, are the animals. A triceratops moves slowly through a stand of cycads, its great frill catching the low morning light. The frill is not bone white the way it appears in museums. It is alive. It is almost certainly vivid with colour, with the oranges and reds and deep purples of a creature that uses visual display the way a modern bird uses its plumage. Behind it, at a distance, 3 Edmontosauruses are standing at the river's edge, drinking in a posture so ordinary it is almost shocking. Heads down, tails held slightly raised for balance, the way a horse drinks. One of them raises its head. Its crest catches the light. It makes a sound, a resonating low sound, and another answers from somewhere in the trees. And further back, in the shadows at the tree line, something watches them. Something that weighs perhaps 7 or 8 tons, that stands on 2 legs, that has arms far too small for its body, and a skull nearly 2 meters long packed with teeth like serrated railway spikes. Tyrannosaurus rex, the top predator of a world that is already beginning to end. Now hold all of that in your mind, and then ask the question, what if none of them died? The mechanics of survival, in the scenario we are exploring tonight, need to be established clearly before we follow the story forward. Because saying the asteroid missed is not by itself enough. The Chicxulub impactor, the object that struck the Yucatan 66 million years ago, was roughly 10 to 15 kilometers across. Its impact released energy equivalent to roughly 100 million megatons of TNT. It triggered a global firestorm. It threw enough dust and debris into the upper atmosphere to block sunlight for months, possibly years. It collapsed photosynthesis on a global scale. It acidified the oceans. It caused the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, which killed approximately 3/4 of all species on Earth, including all non-avian dinosaurs. If this does not happen, the world does not simply continue unchanged. The tectonic forces that were already reshaping the continents continue. The Deccan Traps, a massive volcanic province in what is now India, continue erupting. These eruptions had already been ongoing for some time before the asteroid struck, and they had already been stressing ecosystems, releasing carbon dioxide, warming and then cooling the climate in pulses. In our alternate timeline, the Deccan volcanism is the primary geological stress. It is significant. It causes extinctions of its own. Some species that existed at the end of the Cretaceous would not have survived it even without an asteroid. But the scale of the Deccan catastrophe, while serious, is not comparable to the total civilizational scale collapse that the impact caused. Life, including the larger life forms, could survive it, and does in this imagined world. So we begin at roughly 66 million years ago, in an alternate Earth where the sky over Yucatan stayed clear. And we follow what the fossil record and what we know of paleoclimatology tell us would have happened next. And what would have happened next, within a geologically short time, is something that would have tested even the survivors of the Deccan upheaval in ways they could not have anticipated. Cold was coming, and it was not coming as a sudden catastrophe. It was coming the way a tide comes in, slowly, relentlessly, remapping everything it touched. To understand the ice ages, you need to understand the machinery that produces them. The Earth's climate is not a static system. It is a dynamic one, driven by a complex interplay of orbital mechanics, atmospheric chemistry, ocean circulation, and the arrangement of the continents. The ice ages, the great glaciations that have periodically gripped this planet, are driven in large part by something called Milankovitch cycles, a term named after the Serbian mathematician Milutin Milankovitch, who worked out the mathematics of Earth's orbital variations in the early 20th century. These cycles describe 3 overlapping rhythms in the way Earth moves through space. The first is eccentricity, the degree to which Earth's orbit around the Sun departs from a perfect circle. Over a period of roughly 100,000 years, the orbit stretches from nearly circular to slightly more elliptical and back again. When the orbit is more elliptical, the variation in sunlight received at different times of year becomes greater. The second is axial tilt, or obliquity. Earth's axis is not perfectly perpendicular to its orbital plane. It is currently tilted at about 23.5 degrees, but it oscillates between roughly 22 and 25 degrees over a cycle of approximately 41,000 years. A higher tilt means stronger seasonal contrast. Summers get hotter, winters get colder. The third is precession, the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis, like a spinning top that has been slightly disturbed. This wobble completes a full cycle in about 26,000 years, and it determines which hemisphere is tilted toward the Sun during which part of the orbit. None of these cycles, individually, is enough to cause an ice age, but when they align in particular ways, when orbital geometry conspires to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the high northern latitudes in summer, ice begins to accumulate. Snow that falls in winter does not fully melt in a cooler summer. Ice sheets form and thicken. And ice, once it forms, makes things colder still, because ice reflects sunlight back into space rather than absorbing it. This positive feedback, the ice albedo feedback, amplifies the initial cooling into something much larger. Once the process begins, it is self-reinforcing until the orbital geometry shifts again. In the actual history of our Earth, the ice ages of the Pleistocene, the period that began roughly 2.6 million years ago, were the ones our own species lived through. The woolly mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, the cave bears, the long migrations across land bridges. These are the ice ages people know, but the Milankovitch cycles that drove those glaciations were not invented at the start of the Pleistocene. They have always operated. They operated during the Cretaceous. They operated during the Paleocene and Eocene and Oligocene and Miocene. The scale of their effects varied because other factors, particularly the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere and the arrangement of the continents, modulated how sensitive the climate was to these orbital nudges. But the machinery was always running. In our alternate timeline, the machinery keeps running, and roughly 34 million years after the asteroid missed, something significant happens. The continent of Antarctica, which by this point has drifted to nearly its current polar position, becomes fully isolated from the other southern continents by the opening of the Drake Passage. The Drake Passage is the body of water that separates South America from Antarctica. In actual Earth history, this passage opened roughly 30 to 34 million years ago, and its opening was one of the most consequential events in the history of the Cenozoic climate. Before the passage opened, warm ocean currents could circulate from the southern Atlantic around the bottom of South America and into the Pacific, carrying heat to and from the polar region. When the passage opened, the circumpolar current formed, a powerful ocean current that flows endlessly around Antarctica, isolating it thermally from the warmer oceans to the north. Antarctica began to cool rapidly. Ice sheets began to form. The planet, which had been broadly warm throughout the early Paleocene and Eocene, began its long descent toward the glacial world our ancestors would inhabit. This happens in our alternate timeline too. The orbital mechanics and the tectonic drift are indifferent to what lives on the surface. Antarctica freezes. The global temperature drops. The world that non-avian dinosaurs have been living in, a world broadly warmer than our own, begins to contract. The warm, wet coastal lowlands begin to shrink. The high-latitude forests, which had already extended farther poleward than anything that exists on Earth today, begin to retreat. The ice caps that had been forming seasonally at the poles begin to persist through summer, and the creatures that had diversified and spread across the high latitudes, the cold-adapted lineages that had been quietly evolving since the end of the Cretaceous, begin to face conditions that would test even the most physiologically flexible among them. Because here is a thing the fossil record has been telling us for decades, though it has taken time for the full picture to clarify. Not all dinosaurs were the same. The image of the Mesozoic that most people carry, the image of enormous, sluggish, cold-blooded behemoths basking in permanent tropical warmth, is wrong in almost every important respect. Dinosaurs were not uniformly cold-blooded. The evidence for elevated metabolic rates in many dinosaur lineages is now substantial. Studies of bone microstructure, the internal architecture of fossilized bone tissue, reveal growth patterns in many dinosaur species that are far more consistent with warm-blooded, or at least partially warm-blooded physiology, than with the cold-blooded reptile model. The work of John Horner and his colleagues on hadrosaur bone histology, the microscopic study of bone growth rings and fiber patterns, revealed rapid, sustained growth in these animals that is inconsistent with an ectothermic metabolism. Similar work on theropod dinosaurs, the group that includes Tyrannosaurus and the large carnivores, has shown comparably elevated growth rates. Beyond metabolism, many dinosaur lineages were already feathered. The exquisite fossil beds of the Eocene Formation in Liaoning Province, China, have yielded dinosaur specimens with preserved feather impressions, including large theropods, that demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that insulation was widespread in the group. The famous Yutyrannus, discovered in 2012 and described by Xu Xing and his colleagues, was a large tyrannosaurid, roughly 9 meters long, with evidence of filamentous feathers covering its body. It lived in an environment that was cooler than the typical Cretaceous lowlands, and the insulation likely served a thermoregulatory function. It was managing cold, not perfectly. Not the way a modern Arctic fox manages cold, but managing it. These discoveries matter enormously for our thought experiment. Because a world in which the dinosaurs survive into a cooling Cenozoic is not necessarily a world in which they are helpless before the advancing cold. Some of them, particularly the feathered theropod lineages, had already been dealing with seasonal cold and may have had the physiological toolkit to push further into it. Others, particularly the large herbivores, the hadrosaurs and the ceratopsians, were large enough that body mass itself provided thermal buffering. Large animals lose heat more slowly than small ones, because the ratio of surface area to volume decreases as size increases. A triceratops, weighing somewhere between 6 and 12 tons, was a thermal mass of considerable size. It did not warm up quickly, and it did not cool down quickly. In a cooling world, that matters. But none of this means the transition would have been easy. The early Cenozoic cooling, the long descent that in our actual history saw the mammals radiate into the vacated niches of the non-avian dinosaurs, would have been a profound challenge even for physiologically flexible dinosaur lineages. And it would have been a challenge that played out over millions of years, which is precisely the kind of challenge that evolution is built to answer, given enough time, enough genetic variation, and enough surviving lineages to work with. Let us follow what that answer might have looked like. The first 10 million years after the Cretaceous boundary, roughly 66 to 56 million years ago, are the period we call the Paleocene in actual Earth history. In our alternate timeline, this is the period of the initial recovery and reorganization. The Deccan volcanism has faded. The climate is warmer than today, bathed in the high carbon dioxide levels that volcanic activity had sustained through the late Cretaceous and early Paleocene. Sea levels are high. The shallow inland seas have retreated, but the coastal regions are still broad and warm. The major dinosaur clades, the hadrosaurs, the ceratopsians, the ankylosaurs, the sauropods in their remaining tropical strongholds, and the great theropod lineages are all still present. though the Deccan stress has reduced their diversity somewhat. Species that were already rare at the end of the Cretaceous have gone extinct. The most specialized, the most narrowly adapted, have not made it through, but the major architectural blueprints are intact. The lineages that carry the broad diversity forward are still here. And among them, diversifying rapidly in the warming aftermath of the Deccan stress, are the birds. The avian dinosaurs, the lineage that technically represents the only group of non-avian dinosaurs to survive into the modern era in actual history, are in our alternate timeline simply one part of a much larger and more diverse picture. They are small, numerous, and already extraordinary in their ecological range, but they share the world with their larger, ground-dwelling cousins. And the relationship between these two broad branches of the dinosaur family tree is one of the most interesting features of the alternate Cenozoic we are imagining tonight. The Eocene, which follows the Paleocene and runs from roughly 56 to 34 million years ago, is the warmest sustained period in the Cenozoic of actual Earth history. At the Paleocene-Eocene boundary, approximately 56 million years ago, a dramatic warming event occurs that is well documented in the fossil and geochemical record. This event, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM, involved a rapid release of enormous quantities of carbon into the atmosphere, probably from the destabilization of methane clathrates on the ocean floor or from massive volcanic activity associated with the opening of the North Atlantic. Global temperatures rose by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius over a period of roughly 20,000 years, which is fast on geological timescales, and the warming persisted for about 200,000 years before gradually reversing. In actual Earth history, the PETM triggered rapid evolution and dispersal in the early mammals, with many groups crossing land bridges between continents and diversifying into new body forms. In our alternate timeline, it does something similar for the dinosaurs. The warming opens new territory. The high latitude regions become accessible to warm adapted species. The forests push poleward. The Eocene is, in our imagined history, a second golden age for dinosaurian diversity, a time when lineages that had survived the Deccan stress expand into a warming world and diversify with remarkable speed. The forests of the Eocene alternate world are extraordinary. Fossil evidence from the actual Eocene tells us that polar regions were densely forested during this warm interval. Fossil forests from Ellesmere Island in the Canadian Arctic, from Svalbard, from Antarctica itself, all dating to the Eocene, demonstrate that temperate and even subtropical forests extended to within degrees of both poles during the warmest intervals. Broad-leaved forests of ginkgos, metasequoias, and early angiosperms grew in places that are today tundra and ice. In our alternate world, dinosaurs moved through these forests. Hadrosaur species pushed northward following the tree line. Smaller ceratopsians, faster and more nimble than their giant Cretaceous relatives, move into the temperate deciduous woodlands that ring the polar forests. And among the theropods, a proliferation of feathered, medium-sized hunters develops in the high-latitude environments that, in actual history, the early predatory birds and early carnivorans would have occupied. These high-latitude theropods are among the most fascinating creatures in the alternate natural history we are constructing. We can reason about them with some confidence because we have actual evidence of cold-adapted dinosaur lineages from the Cretaceous itself. The Prince Creek Formation of northern Alaska, which dates to roughly 69 to 70 million years ago, has yielded a remarkable assemblage of dinosaur fossils from a paleo environment that experienced polar darkness for months each year, and temperatures that were genuinely cold by Mesozoic standards. The dinosaurs found there, including the small tyrannosaurid Nanuqsaurus, whose name is derived from the Inupiaq word for polar bear, were living in conditions that most people would not associate with non-avian dinosaurs at all. Nanuqsaurus was not some tropical giant. It was a compact, efficient predator in a cold, seasonally dark landscape, and it was managing. In our alternate Cenozoic, the descendants of Alaskan lineages like Nanuqsaurus are the starting material for the cold-adapted theropod radiation of the Eocene and beyond. They are already feathered. They are already physiologically calibrated for cold and darkness. What the Eocene warmth does is expand their range and diversify their forms, creating a spectrum of body sizes and hunting strategies that ranges from small, swift pack hunters in the high-latitude forests to larger, more heavily built ambush predators in the boreal margins. These animals are not the tyrannosaurids of the late Cretaceous lowlands. They are. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. They are something new, shaped by a world that is already changing, already demanding flexibility in ways their ancestors never faced. But the Eocene warmth cannot last. The opening of the Drake Passage sometime around 34 million years ago in our alternate timeline as an actual history is the turning point. The Antarctic circumpolar current forms, heat stops reaching the pole, the ice sheets begin to build, global temperatures drop sharply, transitioning from the warmth of the Eocene into the significantly cooler Oligocene. In actual Earth history, this transition, the Eocene-Oligocene boundary, is marked by a significant extinction event. Many warm-adapted lineages vanish or contract severely. The cooling is rapid enough on geological timescales to constitute a genuine crisis. In our alternate world, this is the first of what will eventually be several major tests for the surviving dinosaurian clades. And it is here that the divergence between alternate and actual history becomes most dramatic. Because in our actual history, mammals had been diversifying for 34 million years by the time the Eocene ended. They had already developed insulated body coverings. They had already refined endothermy. They had already developed the ability to give birth to live young, to nurse offspring, to invest heavily in individual survival, all traits that would prove enormously adaptive in a cooling world. The dinosaurian lineages in our alternate timeline have had those same 34 million years. But where have they gone with them? This is the part that gets complicated and genuinely interesting. Because the answer, informed by everything the fossil record and evolutionary biology tells us about how adaptation works under directional climate pressure, is probably not a single story. It is many stories running in parallel across different lineages, different latitudes, different ecological niches, all heading in roughly the same direction, but arriving there in very different ways. The hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, are perhaps the easiest to imagine persisting and adapting. In the late Cretaceous, they were already the most successful large herbivores in the northern hemisphere. Diverse and abundant, with complex social structures suggested by the fossil record. Their young grew rapidly, a strong indicator of high metabolic investment. They were herding animals, which provides thermal and predatory protection. They were cognitively sophisticated enough to maintain complex social groups, as indicated by the elaborate crests of many species, which almost certainly served as acoustic and visual signaling devices. The hadrosaur lineage, pushed by Eocene cooling into colder and more seasonal environments, has every evolutionary reason to develop better insulation, more efficient thermoregulation, and more complex behaviors for managing cold. What that looks like in practice is harder to specify, but the direction is clear. They become more like the large, heavily insulated, herd-living ungulates of our actual Pleistocene. They become something you might almost recognize, grazing across the cold steppes of the alternate Oligocene in slow-moving herds. Their skin thicker and their metabolisms higher than those of their Cretaceous ancestors, breathing visible clouds of vapor on cold mornings in a world that is increasingly, undeniably, beginning to feel the approaching ice. The ceratopsians, the horned and frilled dinosaurs, are another story. In the late Cretaceous, they were diverse and widespread in North America, ranging from the enormous Triceratops down to the small, agile, lightly built protoceratopsians. These small ceratopsians, in particular, are well positioned for the alternate Cenozoic. Their low-slung, heavily muscled bodies are structurally not unlike those of some modern ungulates. Their horns and frills, while primarily used for display and combat in the Cretaceous, might serve new functions in a world where predation pressure from increasingly sophisticated theropod lineages drives the evolution of more elaborate defensive strategies. In the cooling world of the Oligocene and beyond, the small and medium ceratopsians diversify. They move into habitats that their large Cretaceous ancestors could not have accessed. The shrubby margins of retreating forests, the open grasslands and scrublands that begin to spread as the climate dries and cools. Some of them, over millions of years of selection pressure, develop thicker keratinous coverings over the exposed areas of their heads and necks. A simple structural solution to cold weather thermoregulation that requires no radical anatomical reorganization. Others develop social behaviors for communal warmth, the way modern musk oxen form defensive circles in blizzards. Evolution, when the selective pressure is consistent and sustained, is remarkably creative. Given millions of years, it finds solutions we would not have predicted. The sauropods, the great long-necked giants, are more constrained. In the actual late Cretaceous, sauropods were already in decline in the northern hemisphere, largely replaced by hadrosaurs as the dominant large herbivores. They survived primarily in the southern continents, in what is now South America and Africa and India. In our alternate Cenozoic, the sauropod story is primarily a southern one. As the world cools, the southern continents, which retain equatorial and subtropical climates longer than the north, become a refuge. The great titanosaurs, the last major sauropod clade, persist and even diversify in these southern refugia through the Eocene and into the Oligocene. They are the elephants of the alternate world, in ecological terms, enormous, long-lived, socially complex herbivores that shape their environments profoundly, clearing forest, creating pathways, moving seeds across vast distances, sustaining whole ecosystems of smaller organisms that depend on the ecological infrastructure the giants provide. But as the cooling accelerates toward the Miocene and beyond, even the southern refugia begin to contract, and the sauropod story becomes one of gradual range reduction and increasing specialization in the narrow tropical band that remains warm enough to sustain them. The theropods, the predatory dinosaurs, are the most physiologically flexible of the major clades, and their story in the alternate Cenozoic is the most complex. The large theropods, the tyrannosaur lineage in the north, the abelisaurids and carcharodontosaurids in the south, face the cooling world from a starting position of already considerable metabolic sophistication. Their bone histology suggests high growth rates and elevated metabolisms even in the Cretaceous. Their descendants, pushed by the climate pressure of the Oligocene cooling, accelerate this trajectory. The northern theropod lineages, already equipped with varying degrees of feathering, develop increasingly complete feather coats over the generations. The thermal insulation provided by feathers is genuinely effective, as any birdwatcher who has seen a raven thriving in an Arctic winter can confirm. A large theropod with a full plumage, particularly one with a downy underlayer beneath the contour feathers, has the insulation of a very effective coat. The selection pressure for this development in a cooling world is intense and unambiguous. Individuals that are better insulated survive the cold season better. They breed more successfully. Their offspring carry the trait forward. Over the millions of years between the Eocene warmth and the Miocene cooling, the large theropods of the northern alternate world transform. The tyrannosaur-descended lineages of the north become something both familiar and deeply alien. Their gross anatomy, the bipedal stance, the powerful jaws, the vestigial forelimbs, is still recognizably theropod. But the surface is entirely different. These animals are feathered from toe to tail crest, in the way a snowy owl is feathered, densely and completely. Their feet, which in some Cretaceous relatives were already equipped with small feathers between the toes, develop true feathered foot coverings that prevent heat loss through the feet, in the way that Arctic birds have heavily feathered tarsi. Their colours, which in the warm Cretaceous had likely been the vivid reds and iridescent blues of display-oriented tropical birds, shift toward the camouflage patterns of cold climate predators. White for winter, mottled grey-brown for the dark months before the snows arrive. These are not the monsters of Cretaceous cinema. These are something stranger and, in their way, more beautiful. Enormous feathered hunters, standing 4 or 5 meters at the hip, moving through the snowy forests of the alternate Oligocene with the quiet, purposeful efficiency of a predator that has been shaped by cold for millions of years. Their prey, the cold-adapted hadrosaurs and ceratopsians of the open northern steppes, have also changed. The hadrosaurs have developed something functionally equivalent to the thick, subcutaneous fat deposits of Arctic mammals, insulating them against the cold that their increasingly feathered coats only partially manage. Their crests, still used for display and social signaling, have shifted function slightly. Some lineages developing crests with heavy vascular beds that can dump or retain heat as conditions require. The same principle used by the enormous veined ears of modern elephants. The ceratopsians of the open steppes are more compact than their Cretaceous ancestors. Their bodies barrel-shaped and heavy-set in the way that cold climate mammals tend to be barrel-shaped and heavy-set, following what biologists call Bergmann's rule. The tendency for individuals and species within endothermic groups to be larger and more compact in colder climates, because a larger body retains heat more efficiently relative to its surface area. All of this is happening against a backdrop of profound geological change. The continents are still moving. North America and South America, which in actual history were not connected until roughly 3 million years ago, when the Isthmus of Panama closed, remain separate in our alternate timeline until the same time. This separation is significant because it means that the northern and southern dinosaur lineages evolve in isolation for most of the Cenozoic. The great sauropod-dominated southern world and the hadrosaur and theropod-dominated northern world are genuinely separate evolutionary theatres, connected only by the occasional accidental rafting event, the way some South American fauna reached the Greater Antilles, or by the periodic land bridges that form and disappear with changing sea levels during glacial cycles. When the Isthmus of Panama closes, roughly 3 million years ago in our alternate timeline as in actual history, what happens is one of the most dramatic biological events since the end of the Cretaceous, the Great American Biotic Interchange. In actual history, this event saw North American mammals invading South America and vice versa, with profound consequences for both faunas. Many South American endemic lineages went extinct. The North American invaders, which included the ancestors of modern horses, tapirs, and giant ground sloths, colonized niches throughout the southern continent. In our alternate timeline, the interchange is between dinosaurian faunas. The large theropods of the north, cold-hardened and ecologically sophisticated after 30 million years of glacial pressure, move south. These sauropods and their associated predators, these southern theropod lineages that had been evolving in warmer conditions, face competition and predation from creatures they have never encountered. The south, which has been slowly cooling under the influence of the global temperature decline but has remained warmer than the north, experiences a wave of ecological disruption. Some southern endemics are displaced, others adapt and persist. The interchange leaves both faunas permanently changed, and the ice is still advancing. The Pleistocene, the epoch that begins roughly 2.6 million years ago in actual Earth history, is the period of true, full-scale glaciation. The Milankovitch cycles, which had been operating throughout the Cenozoic, finally align in a combination that drives massive ice sheets out of the Arctic and across much of the Northern Hemisphere. In actual history, ice sheets at their maximum extent covered much of North America as far south as what is now the Ohio River Valley, much of Northern Europe, and significant portions of Asia. The sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters during the glacial maxima, exposing vast areas of continental shelf as dry land and creating the land bridges that connected continents and islands in ways that shaped the distribution of life profoundly. In our alternate timeline, all of this still happens. The ice advances, the sea levels fall, the continental shelves emerge, Beringia, the land bridge between Asia and North America, forms, the British Isles connect to Europe, Sunderland, the exposed shelf of Southeast Asia, becomes a vast plain connecting the islands to the mainland. The world shrinks and expands in rhythm with the ice, a pulse of alternating cold and warmth that in actual history reshaped the distribution of every living thing on Earth. The dinosaurs of the alternate Pleistocene are not the dinosaurs of the Cretaceous. They have been shaped by 63 million years of evolution since the asteroid missed, evolution that has been driven largely by the demands of a progressively cooling world. The creatures that face the ice ages are the products of that long shaping, just as the mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses and cave bears of our actual Pleistocene were the products of 63 million years of mammalian evolution since the Cretaceous ended. What does that alternate Pleistocene look like? Let us try to feel it. The mammoths of our actual world have a well-known and by now deeply moving story. Woolly mammoths, Mammothus primigenius, were not some impoverished remnant of a once great lineage. They were a highly specialized, extraordinarily successful adaptation to the periglacial environment of the late Pleistocene steppe. Their long guard hairs and dense woolly undercoat provided insulation against temperatures that could fall below minus 50 degrees Celsius on the Siberian plain. Their curved tusks were used to sweep snow from the grass they grazed beneath it, a highly specific behavioral adaptation to the cold grassland environment. Their blood chemistry had evolved at the level of the hemoglobin molecule itself to deliver oxygen efficiently in cold conditions. A set of specific amino acid substitutions identified by Kevin Campbell and his colleagues through analysis of ancient DNA and protein modeling that allow mammoth hemoglobin to release oxygen to the tissues at low temperatures without requiring the warming process that standard mammalian hemoglobin needs. They were perfectly made for their world, right down to the molecular level. The equivalent creatures in our alternate Pleistocene are hadrosaurs, not the hadrosaurs of the Cretaceous, the warm, coastal, relatively lightly insulated animals that fed in subtropical forests. These are their descendants, 63 million years of cold selection later. These animals are substantially larger than their Cretaceous ancestors, because size helps in cold climates. Their skin, where it is not covered by what has become a dense insulating integument of modified scale structures that function analogously to fur, is thick and heavily vascularized. They retain the basic hadrosaur body plan, the broad, laterally flattened tail, the bipedal to quadrupedal flexibility, the dental batteries of hundreds of small teeth for processing tough, cold climate vegetation, but the surface is barely recognizable. Their heads are massive, with enlarged nasal passages that warm incoming cold air before it reaches the lungs. The same solution that caribou and musk oxen use. The same solution that convergent evolution finds again and again when a large animal needs to breathe minus 40-degree air, without damaging its respiratory tissue. They move in herds across the alternate Pleistocene steppe, as the caribou do in our world. The herds can number in the tens of thousands during the great seasonal migrations, when the advancing winter ice pushes the animals south ahead of it, and the spring thaw draws them north again into the reopened grazing grounds. Their passage reshapes the landscape. Their dung enriches the soil. Their grazing maintains the open steppe grasslands that are themselves a product of the cold, dry climate. They are, in the most fundamental ecological sense, the mammoths of the alternate world. Enormous, cold-adapted, migration-driven ecosystem engineers whose existence underpins the structure of an entire biome. And following them, as the wolves and dire wolves followed the mammoths in our actual Pleistocene, are the large theropods of the alternate north, the cold-adapted tyrannosaur descendants that have been evolving for 60 million years under cold selection. They are no longer truly tyrannosaurs in any taxonomic sense that a Cretaceous paleontologist would recognize. They have been shaped too thoroughly by too much time. But the body plan, the deep body plan of the large bipedal carnivore, persists. It is an effective plan. Evolution tends to keep what works. What has changed is everything else. The feathering is complete and dense. The feet are broad, with weight distributed across a wider surface, something closer to the snowshoe hare's feet than to the narrow-toed feet of Tyrannosaurus rex, an adaptation for moving in deep snow without sinking. The skulls are somewhat shorter and broader than those of their Cretaceous ancestors, reflecting both a change in prey type and possibly the thermal advantages of a more compact skull in extreme cold. Their eyes are large, reflecting the reality of winters with months of darkness at high latitudes. And they are not solitary, or not simply solitary. The fossil record of pack hunting among large theropods in the Cretaceous remains contentious, but 60 million years of cold selection, in an environment where a solitary hunter attempting to bring down a multi-ton hadrosaur has poor prospects compared to a coordinated group, produces social hunters. The alternate Pleistocene large theropods hunt in pairs or small groups, coordinating with a degree of social intelligence that would not be particularly surprising to anyone familiar with wolves or African wild dogs, animals that have arrived at the same solution from an entirely different starting point. The smaller theropod lineages, the ones in the middle size ranges between the great herd followers and the small avian dinosaurs that are by now simply called birds, have diversified enormously across the 63 million years of the alternate Cenozoic. Some of them have gone in unexpected directions. There is a lineage of small to medium-sized theropods in the alternate world, descendants of the dromaeosaurid group, the raptors, that has evolved a highly specialized cold weather hunting strategy. These animals, somewhere between a modern wolverine and a large raven in ecological function, if not in appearance, are supreme cold weather generalists. They are fully feathered, including the feet. They are intelligent, with brain-to-body ratios that, in the most advanced lineages of the alternate Pliocene and Pleistocene, approach those of modern corvids. They cache food. They use tools, or something functionally equivalent to tools, specifically the ice itself, which some lineages have learned to use as a hunting aid, driving prey toward ice patches where footing is poor. They are, in the alternate Pleistocene, one of the most cognitively sophisticated animals on Earth. Not in any way human, not possessed of language or culture in any sense comparable to what Homo sapiens would develop in actual history, but genuinely, measurably smart in the way that crows and ravens are smart. Problem-solving, memory-retaining, socially learning animals that adjust their behavior to circumstance in ways that simple instinct cannot account for. In actual Earth history, this ecological and cognitive niche, the highly intelligent, highly flexible, medium-sized generalist predator that can exploit cold environments through learned behavior as well as instinct, was filled by the corvids among birds and eventually by the genus Homo among mammals. In our alternate world, it is filled by feathered theropods. The parallel is not coincidental. It reflects something deep about what cold, variable, challenging environments do to animal intelligence. Cold winters with unreliable food supplies are, in evolutionary terms, intelligence factories. Animals that can remember where food was cached, that can learn from watching others, that can solve novel problems rather than relying on fixed responses, survive better in cold and unpredictable environments than animals that cannot. This has been demonstrated theoretically and empirically in the study of modern corvids, and there is no reason to think it would not apply to theropod lineages facing the same selective pressures over comparable time spans. Now we are deep into the ice ages of the alternate Pleistocene, roughly 2 million years ago in the alternate timeline. The glacial cycles are running on their 100,000 year tempo. Ice advances for 80,000 years and retreats for 20,000. The cold steppe expands and contracts. The great hadrosaur herds follow the grass. The feathered theropods follow the herds. The intelligent dromaeosaurid descended lineages scavenge and cache and problem solve in the frozen margins. The sauropods of the far south have withdrawn to the equatorial regions. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. Holding on in the shrinking tropical forests of Africa and the Amazon basin, where the Pleistocene climate, while cooler and drier than the Eocene, remains warm enough for these giant cold-sensitive animals to persist. The ceratopsians of the open steppes are still present, their compact bodies and elaborately insulated frills marking them as descendants of Cretaceous animals, but only if you know where to look in the bone structure and the dental formula. And the birds are everywhere. The avian dinosaurs, which in our alternate timeline were never the sole survivors of the Cretaceous extinction, have still diversified enormously. The skies of the alternate Pleistocene are full of them. Seabirds, raptors, ground-running birds, Arctic-adapted birds with feathered feet and white winter plumage. In many respects, the bird fauna of the alternate world is not dramatically different from that of our own. The avian dinosaurs found their ecological possibilities and exploited them. They were never blocked from doing so by the asteroid extinction, but they were also never pushed into dominance of the ground-level vertebrate niches the way they arguably were in actual history, where the absence of competing non-avian dinosaurs left ecological space that birds partially, but only partially filled. In the alternate world, they share the world more equitably with their larger relatives. The marine world is also worth pausing on, because the oceans are part of this story too. The marine reptiles of the Cretaceous, the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, the great predatory lizards and long-necked swimmers that ruled the Cretaceous seas, were not dinosaurs. They were reptiles that had returned to the sea from terrestrial ancestors, in the way that whales and sea lions returned to the sea from terrestrial mammal ancestors. In actual history, the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs went extinct at the same time as the non-avian dinosaurs. Not because they were dinosaurs, but because the global collapse of photosynthesis and the disruption of the marine food web destroyed the ocean ecosystems they depended on. In our alternate timeline, where the ocean ecosystems are not similarly disrupted, the marine reptiles survive. They evolved through the Cenozoic alongside the terrestrial dinosaurs. The mosasaurs, already large and fast and metabolically elevated compared to modern lizards, give rise to lineages that fill the niches occupied in our world by dolphins, killer whales, and great white sharks. The plesiosaurs, with their distinctive combination of long neck, 4 flippered limbs, and small head, diversify into the open ocean in ways analogous to what the early whales were doing in actual Earth history. By the Pleistocene of our alternate world, the seas contain mosasaur-descended animals that, viewed from above the waterline, might remind you of something between a dolphin and a very large, very sleek lizard. Their scales have become small and smooth, hydrodynamic, packed close to the body. Some lineages have evolved a functional tail fluke, convergent with the tail flukes of actual cetaceans, for a similar reason. A horizontal, oscillating tail provides more efficient thrust in water than a vertical one. They are warm-blooded, or nearly so. Cold Pleistocene oceans, with their extended seasonal ice, have driven the same metabolic evolution in the marine reptiles that cold air drove in the terrestrial theropods. The seas of the alternate Pleistocene are as rich and ecologically complex as our own, just populated by an entirely different set of large vertebrates. There is something vertiginous about all of this, when you sit with it properly. About the sheer length of 63 million years. About the fact that the Eocene world of the alternate timeline, with its warm polar forests full of early cold adapted hadrosaurs, is as far from the alternate Pleistocene as the late Cretaceous is from our own present. Evolution had 63 million years to work. The same amount of time that, in actual history, took a small, rat-sized insectivore called Purgatorius and turned it into every living primate, including the one reading these words tonight. Given that span of time, the alternate world's creatures are not simply modified Cretaceous dinosaurs. They are fully formed, fully adapted organisms, as different from their Cretaceous ancestors as a blue whale is different from Pakicetus, the small, wolf-like early mammal from which whales descended roughly 50 million years ago. They are native to their world in the way we are native to ours. And their world is one in which the ice, the long, slow ice that began building with the isolation of Antarctica 34 million years ago and reached its full Pleistocene intensity 2.5 million years ago, has been the primary force shaping them. The ice did not destroy them, as the asteroid destroyed the non-avian dinosaurs in actual history. The ice shaped them. It made them what they are. As cold and hardship always make things what they are, by the remorseless pressure of selection over time. There is one more part of this story worth telling before we turn toward the closing, and it involves a question that naturally arises from all that we have been discussing. In the actual world, the Pleistocene ice ages were also the stage on which something unprecedented happened. A single species of large primate, moving out of Africa with a brain disproportionately large for its body and a capacity for cumulative cultural learning that no other animal had ever developed to the same degree, began to transform the planet through behavior rather than anatomy. In actual history, Homo sapiens emerged in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago and reached every habitable corner of the planet by roughly 15,000 years ago, carrying fire and language and cooperative hunting and story and the beginning of everything we call civilization. What happens to that story in the alternate world? The answer is that the primates still exist. The primate lineage, which evolved from early Paleocene insectivores and diversified through the warm Eocene, is present in the alternate world. The primates did not need the non-avian dinosaurs to go extinct in order to evolve. They evolved alongside the dinosaurs, in the forest canopy where most dinosaurs could not follow them. Through the Eocene, Oligocene, Miocene, and Pliocene of the alternate world, the primate lineage continues on roughly the trajectory it followed in actual history, at least in its early stages. The apes appear in Africa in the Miocene. The hominid lineage diverges from the other great apes. And eventually, in the right ecological context, something like a large-brained, upright walking hominin appears. But the context is different. In actual Earth history, the early hominins emerged onto African savannas that were dominated by large mammalian herbivores and their mammalian predators. Carnivores like the saber-toothed cats and the hyenas were the apex predators of the African Pliocene and Pleistocene. In the alternate world, the African savannas are dominated by dinosaurian herbivores and dinosaurian predators. The hominins that emerge in this world are emerging into an ecosystem that is fundamentally different from the one their counterparts faced in actual history. The predation pressure they face is from theropod dinosaurs rather than from saber-tooths. The prey available to them is dinosaurian rather than bovine. The cognitive and social demands of surviving in this environment are different in detail, but perhaps not in kind, from those faced by actual early Homo. What does this do to the trajectory of hominin evolution? Here, the speculation genuinely reaches its limits, because the details of how the specific ecological pressures of the alternate world would have shaped the specific cognitive and social evolution of the hominins are too complex and too contingent to reason about with confidence. We can say that the pressures for intelligence, for cooperation, for language, for tool use are broadly similar to those that operated in actual history. We can say that the hominins of the alternate world face cold and danger, and the need to hunt and gather in a world that is trying to eat them. We can say that evolution, given long enough, tends to find solutions to persistent problems, and that the persistent problem of surviving as a medium-sized, relatively slow, relatively unspecialized primate in a world full of large, fast, highly specialized predators has exactly one well-documented solution, which is to become smart enough and cooperative enough to turn those disadvantages into advantages. What we cannot say is whether the specific cognitive revolution that produced Homo sapiens, the recursive language, the abstract symbolism, the cumulative cultural transmission that allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations, would have occurred at the same time or at all. It might. The pressure is there. The evolutionary toolkit, the large primate brain with its capacity for social learning and symbolic representation, is there. But the timing and the specific form would be shaped by the specific ecological context of the alternate world. And that context is different enough from our own that the hominin story of the alternate world might branch in directions we cannot predict. It is possible, not certain, but genuinely possible, that the alternate world has something like us in it. Something that walks upright, that makes fire, that tells stories around that fire, that looks up at the same stars we see and asks the same questions we ask. Perhaps, perhaps not. The alternate world has had 63 million years to develop its own answers to the question of what intelligence looks like, and at least one of those answers, the Dromaeosaur-descended lineages of the northern cold, has already arrived somewhere interesting without following the primate path at all. The alternate Pleistocene is, in the end, a world of extraordinary richness, cold and beautiful, dangerous and deeply alive, a world in which the great experiment of complex animal life, interrupted by the Chicxulub impactor in actual history, continued unbroken for 63 million years, additional years, and arrived at solutions that we can partially reason toward, but never fully see. It is a world shaped, above all, by the same force that shaped our own. The slow advance and retreat of ice, the grinding patience of the glaciers, the remorseless arithmetic of cold selecting for everything that can survive it. The asteroid missed in this thought experiment, but the ice came anyway, and the ice, as it always has, made the world that followed it. Let the sounds of ice and time fade around you now, as we begin to settle toward the close of this night's journey. Before we move too quickly past the late Cretaceous world that our asteroid missing scenario preserves, it is worth spending more time with the specific animals that would have carried the dinosaurian lineage into the Cenozoic. Because the abstract statement that hadrosaurs and ceratopsians and theropods survive is not the same as understanding which specific creatures, with which specific physiological and behavioral traits, would have been the ones crossing the boundary and inheriting the changing world. The fossil record of the Maastrichtian, that final age before the boundary, is richer than most people appreciate. We know specific animals, specific ecosystems, specific ecological relationships. And that specificity matters for thinking about what a surviving Mesozoic lineage would have been made of. The Hell Creek Formation, deposited in what is now Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wyoming, is one of the most intensively studied Cretaceous fossil assemblages in the world. It represents the very end of the Maastrichtian, the last 2 or 3 million years of the Cretaceous period. The animals found there are not representative of all Cretaceous dinosaurs, and it is important to recognize this. The Hell Creek fauna is a specific community from a specific part of the world at a specific ecological moment. But it is what we know best, and it gives us a concrete picture of what was actually alive on one piece of the planet in the final chapters before the catastrophe. Triceratops horridus and its close relative Triceratops prorsus were the most abundant large herbivores. Individual Triceratops specimens suggest these animals could reach lengths of 8 or 9 meters and weights of perhaps 6 to 12 tons. Their skulls are extraordinary, up to 2.5 meters long, dominated by the massive frill of bone extending back from the skull roof and the 3 forward-pointing horns that give the animal its name. Recent work on growth series on specimens representing different age classes from juvenile to adult has shown that the frills change dramatically across an individual's lifetime. Young Triceratops had short frills with simple margins. Adults had the full, elaborate frill with its characteristic bony projections called epoccipitals along the margin. This ontogenetic change is exactly what you see in animals, where the frill is used for social display rather than simple defense, because elaborate display structures are only costly to develop and maintain if the individual is of breeding age. A juvenile Triceratops investing energy in building a display frill would be wasting resources it needs for growth. An adult investing in that frill is advertising its quality as a potential mate or rival. The detailed study of Triceratops bone histology, carried out by researchers including John Scannella and Jack Horner at the Museum of the Rockies, has also revealed something remarkable. A creature previously classified as a separate genus, Torosaurus, with an even more elaborate frill and large holes or fenestrae in the frill's surface, may actually represent fully mature Triceratops individuals, the most extreme expression of the adult condition. If this interpretation is correct, and it remains debated, then Triceratops underwent one of the most dramatic ontogenetic transformations known in any vertebrate, transforming from a solid-frilled juvenile into a fenestrated, hollow-frilled elder over the course of its lifetime. In our alternate world, this lineage survives. The descendants of Triceratops carry this developmental complexity into the Paleocene and beyond, and the evolutionary pressure of the cooling world acts on that developmental toolkit in ways we can reason about but never fully specify. The hadrosaurs of the Hell Creek Formation are represented by Edmontosaurus annectens and its close relative, with the flattened, crestless skull that has given the hadrosaurs the informal name of duck-billed dinosaurs. Edmontosaurus was a large animal, reaching perhaps 13 meters in length and perhaps 4 tons in weight, moving in herds across the coastal lowlands. The quality of Edmontosaurus preservation in the fossil record is in some cases exceptional. Several specimens from the northern Great Plains preserve not just bone, but the actual skin impression, revealing a scaly integument with larger scales on the dorsal surface and smaller, more granular scales on the sides and belly. One extraordinary specimen, informally called the Edmontosaurus mummy, because of the near-complete preservation of soft tissue, preserved skin, tendons, and even some muscle tissue through rapid desiccation, rather than normal decay. This specimen, studied in detail at the American Museum of Natural History, shows us an animal whose hand was more paddle-like than many reconstructions had suggested, with the fingers webbed in life in a way that the bones alone do not clearly indicate. It tells us something important. There is always more to a living animal than the skeleton preserves. When we imagine the descendants of Edmontosaurus in an alternate Cenozoic, we are always imagining less than was actually there. Actually, the hadrosaur crests deserve particular attention because they speak directly to the question of cognitive and social sophistication in these animals, and cognitive and social sophistication is precisely what a cooling, challenging environment would reward. The crested hadrosaurs, the Lambeosaurines, including animals like Parasaurolophus and Corythosaurus, and Lambeosaurus itself, all of which lived slightly earlier than the terminal Maastrichtian, but represent a lineage that persisted close to the boundary, had hollow cranial crests that formed complex internal nasal passages. Philip Currie, the Canadian paleontologist, and his colleagues have shown through detailed internal cast studies that these passages were resonating chambers. The crest of Parasaurolophus, which curves dramatically backward over the skull, contained a nasal passage that doubled back on itself, creating a tube that, when air was forced through it, would have produced a distinctive low-frequency sound. Reconstructions using computer tomography scanning and digital acoustic modeling suggest frequencies in the range of a few hundred hertz, deep, resonant calls that would carry long distances through the forest. These animals were communicating acoustically with complex, individually distinctive vocalizations. They were social animals with something that resembled voice. In an alternate Cenozoic, that social and acoustic complexity is starting material for a lineage under selection pressure for exactly the kinds of intelligence and social coordination that cold and seasonal environments demand. The theropods of the Hell Creek Formation are dominated by Tyrannosaurus rex itself, one of the most thoroughly studied dinosaurs in the fossil record. More than 50 individual Tyrannosaurus specimens have been described, ranging from juveniles to the largest known individuals. The largest, including the specimen known as Sue, now displayed at the Field Museum in Chicago, were approximately 12 to 13 meters in length, and probably weighed somewhere between 8 and 14 tons, depending on how much soft tissue mass is assumed from the skeletal dimensions. T. rex was among the very largest terrestrial predators that ever existed, and the depth of study it has received has given us a remarkably clear picture of its biology. The evidence for feathering in Tyrannosaurus is indirect but suggestive. Larger relatives in Asia, including Eutyrannus, as already mentioned, were feathered. Smaller relatives in North America, the Proceratosaurids and early Tyrannosaurids, were likely feathered. The question is whether the very largest Tyrannosaurids retained a full feather coat, or whether, as some researchers have suggested, very large endothermic animals would overheat with a complete feather covering in warm Cretaceous climates and might have reduced their plumage in adulthood to aid heat dissipation, keeping feathers primarily on juveniles when the smaller body size made heat retention more critical. This is exactly the pattern seen in some modern large mammals. Elephants and rhinoceroses are largely hairless as adults, retaining hair primarily in juveniles, because a massive warm-blooded body in a hot climate needs to lose heat efficiently rather than retain it. In an alternate Cenozoic cooling world, this constraint reverses. As temperatures drop and the climate shifts from warm subtropical to cold temperate and eventually to periglacial, the selective pressure on large theropods is no longer to minimize insulation, but to maximize it. The feathered condition, already present in juveniles and in the smaller members of the lineage, becomes advantageous at all life stages. Selection favors individuals that retain feathering into adulthood. Over generations, the adult plumage is restored, then elaborated. The Tyrannosaur lineage of the alternate Eocene is more densely feathered than its Cretaceous ancestors. By the Oligocene, it is completely feathered. By the Miocene, in the colder latitudes, the plumage is as complete and dense as that of a modern large bird of prey. Not for display, primarily, though display never stops being a function of feathers in these lineages. Primarily for survival in a world that is no longer interested in accommodating the heat management problems of giant ectotherm-adjacent predators. The bone histology of Tyrannosaurus itself has been studied in extraordinary detail. Mary Schweitzer at North Carolina State University and her colleagues have published extensively on the microstructural details of T. rex bone, including the controversial but increasingly accepted discovery of soft tissue remnants, including what appear to be original protein fragments, preserved within the bone matrix of some specimens. Her work on the growth rate of T. rex, using bone ring counts and fiber organization patterns, shows that juvenile T. rex grew at rates comparable to modern large birds and mammals, reaching much of its adult size within the first 15 to 20 years of life. This rapid growth is consistent with a high metabolic rate. An animal investing that much energy in growth is not a sluggish, cold-blooded reptile waiting for sunshine to warm it into activity. It is a warm-blooded or near warm-blooded animal running on internal metabolic heat, building towards its adult form as quickly as its physiology allows. This matters for the alternate world scenario because it tells us what we are actually starting with. We are not imagining cold-blooded giant lizards learning to cope with frost. We are imagining already warm-blooded, fast-growing, cognitively active predators encountering cold and responding to it with the evolutionary tools they already possess. Let us stay for a moment longer in the specific world of the late Cretaceous, and then begin the journey forward through time with more attention to the intermediate stages. Because the story is not only in the destination, it is in. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. It is in the path. The world of 66 million years ago, the world that in our alternate scenario does not end at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary but continues forward, was itself the product of a very long prior history. The Mesozoic lasted approximately 180 million years, from the first appearance of dinosaurs in the Triassic roughly 230 million years ago to the end of the Cretaceous. Over that extraordinary span of time, the dinosaurs diversified into every major terrestrial herbivore and large carnivore niche available. They lived on every continent including Antarctica, which was not yet polar during the warmer intervals of the Jurassic and Cretaceous. They ranged in size from the crow-sized Microraptor to the enormous sauropods, like Patagotitan. The Titanosaur from Argentina estimated to have weighed roughly 60 to 70 tons, making it one of the heaviest animals in the history of life on Earth. The diversity of the late Cretaceous dinosaur fauna is easy to understate. In North America alone, the Campanian and Maastrichtian stages, the final 20 million years of the Cretaceous, produced dozens of large dinosaur species, and the true diversity was certainly much greater than the fossil record currently reveals, because fossilization is a rare and geographically uneven process. We know most about animals that live near rivers, in environments where sediment was deposited rapidly enough to bury and preserve bones before they were destroyed. We know almost nothing about the animals of the upland interiors, the mountain-flanking forests, the dry highlands. The real Cretaceous was almost certainly more diverse than anything the fossil record shows us. This background diversity matters in the alternate scenario because it is the raw material for what comes next. A richer initial diversity means more lineages crossing the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary in our imagined scenario. More starting points for the Cenozoic diversification, more evolutionary possibilities. The alternate Paleocene is not populated by a handful of lucky survivors. It is populated by a complex, structured community of animals with long evolutionary histories and established ecological relationships, slightly reduced by the Deccan volcanism, but fundamentally intact. The Deccan traps are worth understanding properly. This volcanic province in what is now central India represents one of the largest volcanic events in the last 500 million years of Earth history. The eruptions produced enormous volumes of flood basalt, thick layers of solidified lava that built up over roughly a million years straddling the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, from roughly 66 to 65 million years ago. The total volume of lava erupted has been estimated at roughly 1 million cubic kilometers. The eruptions released vast quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The carbon dioxide caused gradual warming. The sulfur dioxide caused periodic cooling, because sulfate aerosols in the stratosphere reflect sunlight. The net effect was a climate that oscillated between warm and cool phases over the period of the eruptions, stressing ecosystems repeatedly. There is considerable scientific debate about the relative contributions of the Deccan volcanism and the Chicxulub impact to the end Cretaceous extinction. In actual Earth history, the impact was the decisive event, the one that tipped the balance from a stressed ecosystem into a collapsed one. In our alternate scenario, the impact does not occur, but the Deccan volcanism does. Its effects are real and significant. Some species that were already stressed by the volcanic climatic oscillations would not have made it through regardless of whether the asteroid arrived. But the volcanic effects, while serious, are survivable for the major lineages. The geological record of the Deccan eruptions, studied in detail by researchers including Goethe Keller, Thierry Adat, and their collaborators, suggests that the eruptions alone could have caused significant but not total extinction. Life would have been reduced and reshuffled, but not collapsed. The early Paleocene of the alternate world, then, begins with a somewhat impoverished but structurally intact dinosaurian ecosystem. The recovery from the Deccan stress is relatively rapid, on geological timescales. Within a few million years, the major lineages have rebound populations. The warm climate of the early Paleocene, sustained by the elevated carbon dioxide that the Deccan eruptions have left in the atmosphere, is broadly similar to the late Cretaceous climate, warmer than today, with shallow seas extending into continental interiors, with forests reaching higher latitudes than they currently do, with the polar regions largely free of permanent ice. In these conditions, the early Cenozoic dinosaurs spread and diversify. The geographic barriers of the late Cretaceous persist for a time. North America and Europe are separated by the broad Tethys Sea and the northern Atlantic, which is still opening. South America and Africa are also separated. The various continents carry their distinct faunas as isolated evolutionary theatres. In South America, the titanosaur sauropods and the abelisaurid theropods continue the evolutionary trajectories they had been following since the mid-Cretaceous, when the separation of South America from Africa had begun isolating them from the northern faunas. In Asia, the rich dinosaur fauna of the late Cretaceous, which included the oviraptorosaurian theropods with their elaborate crests and toothless beaks, the pachycephalosaurians with their domed skulls used in headbutting contests, and the early tyrannosaur relatives, continues its own evolutionary experiment. The Pacific Ocean is a barrier in the early Cenozoic, as it was in the Cretaceous. The land bridge between Asia and North America, the broad low-lying region of Beringia, forms and breaks depending on sea levels, but it allows periodic faunal exchange between the two continents during times of low sea level. This exchange has been documented in actual Earth history through the biogeographic analysis of mammalian lineages. The same exchange would have occurred in the alternate world between the Asian and North American dinosaurian faunas, creating the complex mosaic of overlapping and distinct species that characterizes any real-world continental fauna. As the Paleocene transitions into the Eocene roughly 56 million years ago, the stage is set for the great warmth that follows. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, as previously noted, is a pivotal event. In actual Earth history, its cause is still debated, with candidates including the volcanism associated with the opening of the North Atlantic Ocean between Greenland and Europe, the destabilization of frozen methane deposits on the ocean floor, or some combination of both. The isotopic signature of the carbon released during the PETM, a depletion in the heavier carbon isotope compared to normal atmospheric carbon, is consistent with a biologically derived source, which has led some researchers to favor the methane clathrate hypothesis. The carbon had to come from somewhere large and rapid, and the organic signature suggests it was not simply volcanic. Whatever its cause, the PETM raised global mean temperatures by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius in as little as 20,000 years, an extraordinary rate of change, and the warming persisted for roughly 200,000 years before a combination of carbon drawdown through weathering and burial restored the climate to something closer to its pre-PETM state. Ocean temperatures rose significantly. Tropical conditions expanded poleward. The deep oceans, which had been somewhat cooler than surface waters, warmed substantially, leading to the extinction of many deep-sea benthic foraminifera, tiny single-celled organisms that are highly sensitive to ocean temperature and chemistry. For the terrestrial ecosystems of the alternate world, the PETM is an expansion event. Warm conditions are broadly favourable for reptile-derived metabolisms, even the highly elevated metabolisms of the warm-blooded dinosaurian lineages. The expansion of tropical and subtropical forests to higher latitudes opens new territory for the larger, warm-adapted herbivore lineages. The hadrosaurs of the northern forests, which had been gradually pushing into higher latitudes through the Paleocene, find the Eocene warmth an invitation to spread further still. Fossil sites from the actual Eocene reveal temperate and subtropical forests at latitudes of 60 degrees or higher, locations that today are tundra or boreal forest. And these sites preserve the plant communities that Eocene animals lived within. Broad-leaved forests of early plane trees and ancient laurels, and spreading ginkgos, mixed with early flowering plants of the families that would eventually produce the magnolias and poplars and oaks of our own time. These are the forests where the hadrosaur lineages of the early alternate Eocene live. They are not the narrow coastal lowland strips of the Cretaceous. They are vast, continuous forest systems stretching from the mid-latitudes to within reach of the poles. The hadrosaurs that move through them have had roughly 10 million years to adapt to a world that is somewhat cooler and more seasonal than the late Cretaceous, and the PETM's warmth is, for them, a relaxation of that selective pressure. It is a good time. The food is abundant. The climate is benign. The great forests hold more browsing and grazing opportunities than any animal could exhaust. But this ease, this Eocene richness, carries within it the seeds of the challenge to come. Because animal populations that expand rapidly in times of plenty are larger when times become harder, and larger populations carry more genetic variation, more raw material for evolution to work with. The hadrosaur lineages that will face the Oligocene cooling do so with the evolutionary material accumulated through 10 million years of successful Eocene diversification. They are not an impoverished remnant. They are a diverse and physiologically sophisticated group, carrying within their gene pools the variation that selection can act on as the cold descends. The transition from the Eocene to the Oligocene, approximately 34 million years ago, is marked in actual Earth history by a rapid and significant cooling. This is the event that glaciologists call the OI-1 glaciation, a reference to the oxygen isotope signal in marine sediments that records the growth of Antarctic ice sheets. Within a geologically short period, roughly 300,000 years, global mean temperatures drop by approximately 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. This may not sound like much, but in a system that had been broadly warm for 50 million years, it represented a massive shift. Ice cores and sediment records from Antarctica show the rapid growth of ice sheets during this transition. The East Antarctic ice sheet, which today holds approximately 26 million cubic kilometers of ice, apparently formed close to its present size in a geologically rapid event at the Eocene-Oligocene boundary. The cause of this transition has been attributed primarily to the opening of the Drake Passage and the formation of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, but recent research has complicated this picture. Drake Passage opening was probably a gradual process, not a sudden one, and may have begun several million years before the rapid OI-1 cooling event. Other factors, including a significant drawdown of atmospheric carbon dioxide during this period, may have been equally important. Decreasing carbon dioxide reduces the greenhouse effect, allowing more heat to escape to space, and the Eocene-Oligocene boundary is associated with a significant decrease in atmospheric carbon dioxide as reconstructed from geochemical proxies. In our alternate timeline, this cooling occurs regardless. The Milankovitch cycles, the tectonic drift, the carbon cycle dynamics, none of these are changed by the survival of the non-avian dinosaurs. The same cooling hits a different set of animals, and the selective pressure it creates is intense and rapid by evolutionary standards, though 300,000 years is still 30,000 generations for a large animal with a 10-year generation time. 30,000 generations is enough time for very substantial evolutionary change, as the documented evolution of resistance to new diseases, of size changes in response to hunting pressure, and of metabolic changes in response to captive conditions in modern animals all demonstrate. Evolution can move fast when the pressure is strong and the variation is present. The Oligocene world that emerges from the Eocene-Oligocene cooling transition is fundamentally different from the warm world that preceded it. The forests that had extended to the poles retract. Open habitats, grasslands and shrublands begin to spread in the middle and high latitudes. The grasses, which had been a minor component of Eocene vegetation, begin their great expansion. Grasses are extraordinary plants in their ecological effects. They are highly productive in open, dry conditions where forests cannot maintain themselves. They store much of their biomass underground, in root systems that protect them from grazing and from fire. They evolved the C4 photosynthetic pathway in some lineages, a more efficient form of photosynthesis that works particularly well in hot, dry conditions with lower carbon dioxide levels. And this adaptation drove the great grassland expansion of the Miocene and beyond. The spread of open grasslands and shrublands in the Oligocene creates new ecological opportunities that, in actual Earth history, the evolving ungulate mammals exploited. In our alternate world, it is the ceratopsian and hadrosaur lineages that move into these open habitats. The transition is not instant, it takes millions of years. But the pressure is there, and the functional requirement of open country grazing is something that the hadrosaur dental batteries are already well equipped to meet. Hadrosaurs had some of the most elaborate dental systems of any known vertebrate, with hundreds of tightly packed teeth in each jaw forming a continuous grinding surface. Renewed constantly as old teeth were worn down and new teeth erupted from below. This dental system was designed for high-volume processing of tough vegetation, and it is as effective on Oligocene grasses and sedges as it was on Cretaceous cycads and early angiosperms. If anything, the nutritional demands of large-bodied animals in a cooler, less productive environment place a premium on efficient digestion, and the hadrosaur dental battery is precisely the kind of adaptation that becomes more rather than less valuable as the vegetation they need to process becomes tougher and less nutritious. The ceratopsians, for their part, bring their own dental toolkit to the Oligocene grasslands. Their teeth are shearing rather than grinding, adapted for slicing through tough plant material rather than crushing it, and the combination of a powerful beak and multiple rows of shearing teeth makes them effective processors of fibrous vegetation. The evolutionary trend in the Oligocene ceratopsians of the open habitat is towards smaller, faster, more energy-efficient body forms, a contrast with the trend toward large, cold-tolerant bodies that the hadrosaurs follow in the higher latitudes. The open-steppe ceratopsians of the alternate Oligocene are not the great horned giants of the late Cretaceous. They are smaller, faster, more agile animals, with reduced frills in some lineages and elaborated, more functionally horn-based defense systems in others, reflecting the shift from primarily display-based frill function to primarily defense-based horn function as the predation landscape changes. Because the predation landscape does change, the large theropods of the alternate Oligocene, shaped by the same cooling that is reshaping their prey, are evolving toward the efficient cold country hunters we have already described. But the relationship between predator and prey is not static. It is an evolutionary arms race, each side responding to the adaptations of the other in the endless back and forth that biologists call co-evolution. As the hadrosaurs of the open steppe become faster and more alert to aerial and terrestrial threats, the hunting strategies of the theropods are under pressure to evolve greater coordination and greater intelligence. As the ceratopsians develop more effective horn-based defenses, the theropods are under pressure to find the vulnerabilities in those defenses through experience and learning rather than simple instinct. This arms race is one of the most powerful engines of cognitive evolution known in evolutionary biology. It drives the development of theory of mind, the ability to model another animal's behavior, to predict what it will do next, to understand it as an agent with its own intentions rather than simply as a stimulus that produces responses. Predator-prey arms races, particularly in open environments where neither predator nor prey has cover to rely on, and both must rely primarily on their wits and their speed and their ability to read each other, are among the most cognitively demanding environments in the biological world. The cheetah-gazelle relationship on the African savanna, where each must outthink the other in real time at high speed, is one of the most intensively studied examples in modern ecology. In the alternate Oligocene open steppe, the relationship between the large theropod hunters and the fleet-footed ceratopsians and steppe-adapted hadrosaurs is performing the same cognitive selection function, driving both parties toward greater neural complexity with each generation. It is worth pausing here to think about brain size in the context of dinosaurian evolution, because this is an area where real fossil evidence informs the alternate scenario in interesting ways. Endocasts, casts of the internal space of the skull that preserve the approximate shape and size of the brain, have been studied in a number of dinosaur species. The theropods generally had larger brains relative to body size than the herbivorous dinosaurs, consistent with the cognitive demands of active predation. The small theropods, including the dromaeosaurids, the troodontids, and the birds themselves, had particularly high encephalization quotients, measures of brain size relative to body size. Troodon formosus, a small, lightly built theropod from the late Cretaceous of North America, had an encephalization quotient approaching that of modern birds, and its large, forward-facing eyes suggest excellent binocular vision and correspondingly sophisticated visual processing. The troodontids and their relatives are, in actual Earth history, an evolutionary dead end. They do not survive the Cretaceous extinction. In our alternate timeline, they do. And the cognitive potential that the fossils hint at, the potential that produces, in the actual world, the intelligence of modern crows and ravens and parrots within the avian lineage, is available as starting material for the alternate Cenozoic. Given the selection pressure of the alternating warm and cold phases of the Oligocene and Miocene, given the arms race dynamics of the open steppe predator-prey relationship, given 60 million years of cognitive evolution, what emerges from that starting material is something genuinely different from any animal in our actual world. The troodontid descendants of the alternate Miocene, roughly 20 million years ago, are small to medium-sized feathered theropods with brain-to-body ratios that exceed those of any living non-avian reptile. They have not yet reached the cognitive heights of the ravens of our world, but they are heading in that direction. They use tools or functional equivalents, stones for cracking the shells of the small turtle-like creatures that are common in their habitat, sticks for extracting insects from decaying wood. They cache food under leaves and bark. They play in the way that crows play, experimenting with objects and situations in ways that appear to have no immediate survival function, but that may function as practice and learning. Young individuals engage in extended play with adults and peers, a behavioral signature of animals where learned skills matter more than instinctive ones. The social structure of these animals is complex. They live in small groups, 3 to 8 individuals, with what appears from the study of fossil assemblage patterns, the clustering of individuals in the rock, to be a stable social organization that persists across seasons. This is not the casual aggregation of animals that happen to be near the same food source. It is the kind of persistent social group that requires individual recognition, tracking of social relationships across time, and management of social tensions through communication and negotiation. Modern crows live in exactly this way. Modern wolves live in this way. The cognitive demands are similar, and the evolutionary solutions tend to converge on similar brain architectures. By the late Miocene and early Pliocene, roughly 5 to 10 million years ago in the alternate timeline, the troodontid descendants have diversified into several lineages with different ecological specializations, but all sharing the high encephalization and social complexity of their ancestral stock. Some lineages have moved into aquatic edge environments, exploiting the productive zones along rivers and lake margins. Others have specialized in the cooler high-latitude forests, where the combination of complex social foraging and food caching gives them a significant advantage over simpler, more instinct-driven competitors. The most cognitively advanced of these lineages are doing something that no non-avian dinosaur is known to have done in the Cretaceous. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. They are learning from each other in ways that produce local traditions, behavioral variants that spread through groups by observation and imitation rather than by genetic inheritance. This is protoculture. It is not human culture. It does not involve language in any form we would recognize, but it is the beginning of the evolutionary process that, in actual Earth history, produced the first stone tools, the first controlled fire, the first deliberate burial. The geological events of the late Miocene and Pliocene are relevant here. The climate continues its long descent toward the full glaciation of the Pleistocene. The Mediterranean Sea, partially cut off from the Atlantic by tectonic movements, partially desiccates during the Messinian salinity crisis, roughly 5 to 6 million years ago, leaving enormous salt deposits on the seafloor before the Atlantic reconnects and floods the basin. The Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, pushed upward by the continuing collision of India with Asia, reach heights sufficient to alter large-scale atmospheric circulation patterns, changing the monsoon and creating the conditions for increased aridity across Central Asia and Africa. The African savannas expand, the forests of tropical Africa contract, and in those contracting forests, the primates that have been evolving there since the Eocene are under increasing pressure to adapt to open environments. The hominin story in our alternate world begins to emerge from this African ecological pressure in much the same way and at much the same time as it did in actual history. The key selective pressures that drove the evolution of bipedality and large brains in the actual hominins, the shift to more open environments, the premium on efficient long-distance travel across open ground, the cognitive demands of social hunting and gathering in a complex and variable environment, are present in the alternate African savannas just as they were in the actual ones. The specific ecological context is different in that the large herbivores and predators of those savannas are dinosaurian rather than mammalian, but the functional relationships, the hominin as a medium-sized, vulnerable primate adapting to an open environment full of large and dangerous animals, are broadly comparable. The hominins of the alternate Pliocene and early Pleistocene are evolving alongside the large theropod predators of the African open habitat, which in the alternate world would have followed the same broad trajectory of cold adaptation and increased sociality as the northern theropods we have already described, though in a warmer African context. These are not the tyrannosaur-descended lineages of the north. They are descendants of the abelisaurid and carcharodontosaurid theropods of the southern Cretaceous, shaped by a different 66 million years of evolution. By the Pliocene, they are active, social hunters, smaller than their Cretaceous ancestors, faster and more cognitively sophisticated, in the way that modern African wild dogs are faster and more cognitively sophisticated than the megapredators of the Pleistocene mammal fauna. The hominins that emerge alongside them are shaped by the pressure of avoiding and occasionally competing with these predators. The same cognitive demands, the theory of mind, the social coordination, the ability to model predator behavior and predict it, that drove hominin intelligence in actual history are present and active. The timeline may be slightly different, the specific forms of early tools and social organization may differ in details, but the broad direction of hominin evolution in the alternate Pliocene is recognizable from our own. It is genuinely possible, and worth sitting with this thought quietly, that the alternate Pleistocene world contains two independently evolved lineages of cognitively sophisticated animals, both shaped by cold and predation pressure, and the demands of surviving in complex variable environments, but arriving at their intelligence through entirely different evolutionary paths. The hominins, following their primate trajectory from social living and manual dexterity and visual processing in the forest canopy. The troodontid descendants, following their theropod trajectory from active pursuit predation and social hunting and the arms race of the open steppe. Two solutions to the same deep problem. Two answers to the question that cold and complexity always ask: what is the most powerful tool an animal can carry? The answer, always and everywhere, is a mind. This is the part of the alternate world that is hardest to specify and most tempting to imagine. Whether the hominin lineage and the troodontid lineage ever encounter each other in ways that leave a mark on either, whether the alternate Pleistocene has something analogous to the complex ecological relationship between early Homo and the large predators of the actual African Pliocene, whether these two independently smart lineages influence each other's evolution or simply occupy different enough niches to coexist without major interaction. These questions cannot be answered from the evidence we have, which is, of course, only the evidence of the actual world. They are properly speculative in the sense that any deeply honest thought experiment reaches the place where reasoning runs out and imagination takes over, but imagination informed by everything we actually know. What we can say, with confidence grounded in the actual fossil record and evolutionary biology, is that the world we have been exploring tonight is a scientifically coherent possibility, not a certainty. The specific forms of the alternate creatures are imaginative extrapolation, and actual evolutionary outcomes are always more surprising and more specific than any thought experiment can capture. But the broad architecture of the alternate world, the cold adapted hadrosaur herds, the feathered high latitude theropods, the intelligent dromaeosaurid descendants, the southern sauropod refugia, the avian dinosaurs coexisting with their larger relatives. All of this is grounded in real evidence about what the Cretaceous dinosaurs were, how evolution works under directional climate pressure, and what the actual Cenozoic climate history of this planet looked like. The ice came. That part is true in every version of this story. There is a specific scene worth constructing here, a specific moment in the alternate Miocene, roughly 15 million years ago, because abstraction can only carry us so far. At some point, the thought experiment needs to become particular. To land in a specific place at a specific time of day with specific weather and specific animals doing specific things, if it is going to feel real in the way that science-informed imagination can feel real. Picture the northern margin of what will one day be central Germany. It is autumn. The Miocene world in this region is cooler than the Eocene was, but warmer than it will eventually become. The forests are dense and mixed, a combination of ancient conifers and broadleaf trees, including early relatives of the beeches and oaks, with an understory of ferns and shrubs, and the scrambling early ancestors of the climbing plants that will eventually produce the ivy-covered walls of European ruins. The light is low and golden, the light of middle autumn in a temperate zone, slanting through the trees at an angle that turns the fallen leaves on the forest floor into small pools of amber and copper and rust. At the edge of a clearing, a herd of 12 animals is grazing. They are hadrosaurs, the descendants of the Edmontosaurus lineage, and they have been shaped by 15 million years of Cenozoic cooling and forest adaptation since the Paleocene. They are smaller than their Cretaceous ancestors, perhaps 4 to 5 meters in length, rather than the 13 of Edmontosaurus itself, a consequence of the forest environment, where smaller body size is an advantage for moving through dense vegetation, and of the cooler climate, where the thermal cost of maintaining a large body is higher. Their colouring is brown and grey and speckled, cryptic against the autumn forest floor. They have something that their Cretaceous ancestors did not. A dense layer of modified scale-like structures covering their bodies from the shoulder blades to the flanks. Structures that, under close examination, are neither exactly scales nor exactly feathers, but something in between. Small, overlapping, insulating panels that lie flat against the skin in warm weather and can be raised slightly to trap air when cold. They are grazing on the late-season shrubs, pulling branches with their broad, blunt snouts, grinding the fibrous autumn vegetation with the battery of hundreds of small teeth that their lineage has carried since the Cretaceous. Occasionally, one of them raises its head, crest catching the light, and emits a soft, resonating sound, somewhere between a low hoot and a rumble that seems to carry through the forest further than its volume should allow. The others answer. The calls are not random. They follow a pattern, a conversation of sorts, though not the kind of conversation that involves abstract propositions. It is the kind of conversation that says, I am here, and I am fine, and the forest is quiet, and you should graze. At the far edge of the clearing, partly screened by the last of the standing bracken, two animals are watching the herd. They are theropods, descendants of the European theropod lineage that has been evolving on the European archipelago, the series of island landmasses that the alternate Miocene European continent represents, for most of the Cenozoic. They are roughly 2 meters tall at the hip, so somewhat smaller than the great Cretaceous theropods of North America, a consequence of island evolution, which tends toward reduced body size in large animals because island environments support less biomass and therefore cannot sustain very large predators. Their bodies are entirely covered in dense, close-lying plumage, dark grey-brown with lighter speckling on the face and throat. Their eyes are amber, large, and fixed on the hadrosaurs. They are watching the herd with an intensity that is not the fixed, reptilian stare of a cold-blooded animal waiting for something to enter its field of view. It is an active, scanning, intelligent attention. Their heads move in small, precise increments, tracking the position of each hadrosaur in the herd, reading the herd's behavior, noting which individuals are most alert, which are most focused on their grazing, which are standing close to others, and which are slightly isolated. This is assessment. It is the kind of behavior that ethologists studying wolves and African wild dogs describe as the predator's reading of the prey group. The process of identifying the individual most likely to be vulnerable and least likely to generate a coordinated defensive response from the rest of the herd. And then, without any apparent signal between them, both theropods shift their weight slightly onto their forward foot. The movement is small. It is the kind of movement that, if you were standing at the edge of the clearing watching them, would not immediately register as dangerous, but it registers in the herd. One of the hadrosaurs, the one at the periphery, raises its head sharply. The crest inflates slightly with blood pressure, a visible physiological change. The animal's call changes, a short, sharp, rising note. And the herd is moving before the echo of that note fades, flowing together and away from the edge of the clearing with the fluid, coordinated efficiency of animals that have been making this decision together for 10,000 generations. The theropods do not pursue. They watch the herd go. One of them picks up a fallen stick from the forest floor, turns it over twice in its hands, the forelimbs reduced from the Cretaceous standard but still functional, and sets it down. The gesture means nothing, probably. It is the kind of manipulation that these animals engage in constantly, partly as sensory exploration and partly as what appears to be something very close to play. But the other theropod watches the gesture, and watches where the stick is set down, and that watching is, in the quiet of the Miocene forest, the most interesting thing in the clearing. Learning by observation, the cognitive prerequisite for culture. 15 million years before the alternate Pleistocene, and it is already beginning. The Miocene itself, running from roughly 23 to 5 million years ago, is one of the most interesting epochs of the Cenozoic in terms of climate change and its ecological effects. The early Miocene was relatively warm, a partial recovery from the Oligocene cooling, and the middle Miocene, roughly 15 to 14 million years ago, included a warm interval called the middle Miocene climatic optimum, when global temperatures briefly rose toward Eocene levels. But the late Miocene saw a resumption of cooling, driven by the continued buildup of Antarctic ice and by the decreasing atmospheric carbon dioxide that accompanied increasing rates of silicate rock weathering as mountain ranges continued to be uplifted by tectonic activity. The Miocene is also the epoch of the Great Grassland Expansion. The spread of C4 grasses across the interior of continents, first detected clearly in the fossil record through carbon isotope shifts in tooth enamel of grazing animals and in soil carbonates roughly 8 to 6 million years ago, transformed the ecology of the mid-latitude continental interiors. Open, dry, highly productive grasslands replaced the mixed forest-woodland mosaic of the earlier Cenozoic across enormous areas of what would become the American Great Plains, the African savanna, and the Asian steppes. This expansion created the ecological stage on which the great megafaunal communities of the Pliocene and Pleistocene, including the iconic mammal fauna of our actual world, performed their drama. In the alternate world, the grassland expansion drives the radiation of the open country hadrosaur and ceratopsian lineages that we have already briefly discussed, but it does more than that. It creates, for the first time in the Cenozoic, truly vast open plains across which large groups of herbivores can move, and where the visual horizon extends for kilometers. This is a fundamentally different environment from the forests and woodlands that dominated earlier in the Cenozoic, and it requires fundamentally different adaptations. In a forest, predator avoidance is primarily about sound and smell, about the quiet approach and the sudden sprint through cover. In an open plain, it is primarily about vision, distance, and coordinated group response. The animals that survive on the open Miocene plain are the ones that can see far, react fast, and move together as a coordinated social unit. The hadrosaurs that expand onto the Miocene open plains are already social, already acoustically communicative, already equipped with the sensory and cognitive infrastructure for coordinated group behavior. What the open plain does is select for more of this. More social cohesion, more rapid coordination, more sophisticated communication between group members. The calls of the open plain hadrosaurs diversify. The crest-based resonating chambers evolve greater complexity in some lineages, producing a wider repertoire of distinguishable calls. This is not language in any meaningful sense, but it is the evolution of a richer communication system, and it provides a social platform on which more complex behaviors can be built. The theropods following the herds onto the open plain face their own evolutionary pressure. Pursuit predation in open country, the strategy of chasing prey over distance rather than ambushing it in cover, demands a different body plan from forest hunting. Longer legs, greater stamina, faster acceleration. The open plain theropods of the late Miocene are leaner and longer-legged than their forest relatives. Convergent in some respects with the body plan of the large cursorial birds of prey in our actual world. Though they are not birds, and their feathering has a different structure and function. They are also more visibly social in the open habitat, where their cooperative hunting strategies are apparent to any observer from a distance. The late Miocene also sees the beginning of a faunal exchange between the isolated evolutionary theatres that have been developing separately since the early Cenozoic. The North Atlantic is still a barrier between Europe and North America, but shallow land connections between North Africa and Southern Europe have become intermittently available as sea levels fluctuate with the growth of Antarctic ice. The Tethys Sea, which had separated Europe from Asia for much of the early Cenozoic, has largely closed by the Miocene, allowing faunal exchange between the European archipelago and the Asian continent. The result is a gradual mixing of European and Asian dinosaurian faunas that produces new hybrid communities with greater diversity than either parent fauna had in isolation. From Asia, the theropod lineages that have been evolving in the vast interior of the continent bring new body forms and new strategies to the European mixing zone. From Europe, the island-evolved lineages that have followed the insular evolution trajectory towards smaller body size and greater cognitive flexibility bring their own innovations. The meeting of these two evolutionary streams in the late Miocene is one of the most productive moments of the alternate Cenozoic, generating hybrid lineages that combine the physical resources of the Asian mainland fauna with the cognitive sophistication of the island-evolved European lineages. It is here, in this late Miocene mixing zone, that the ancestors of the Pliocene and Pleistocene intelligent feathered hunters first appear in the fossil record of the alternate world, their bones pressed into the fine-grained sediments of ancient lake margins that geologists in the far future will one day crack open and wonder at. The Pliocene, running from roughly 5 to 2.6 million years ago, is the epoch immediately before the full onset of the Pleistocene glaciations. The climate continues to cool. The Isthmus of Panama closes around 3 million years ago, connecting North and South America and shutting off the exchange of warm Atlantic and Pacific surface waters that had previously moderated temperatures in the North Atlantic region. This closure has been linked to the intensification of Northern Hemisphere glaciation that marks the beginning of the Pleistocene. With the Atlantic no longer able to transport warm water through the gap between the continents, the North Atlantic becomes saltier and denser, and the deep thermohaline circulation, the global ocean conveyor belt that moves heat from the tropics to the poles, intensifies. Paradoxically, this intensification of heat transport to the north may have increased evaporation and snowfall at high northern latitudes, contributing to the buildup of northern hemisphere ice sheets. The closing of a gap between two continents, a tectonic event on a geological timescale, initiated the ice age in which our own species was born. In the alternate world, the same closure occurs. The same intensification of northern hemisphere glaciation begins. The ice sheets that had been forming and melting in Antarctica for 30 million years now begin to build in the northern hemisphere as well, spreading out from the Scandinavian and Canadian Arctic across what had previously been temperate forest. The already cold-adapted dinosaurian lineages of the northern continents are tested as they have never been tested before. The glacial maxima, when the ice sheets reach their greatest extent, are conditions far more extreme than anything the alternate Oligocene or Miocene had produced. Temperatures in the continental interiors, far from the moderating influence of the ocean, drop to levels that challenge even the most physiologically sophisticated warm-blooded animals. The woolly mammoth of our actual world survived these conditions because it had been shaped by 3 million years of progressive cooling from the warm-adapted ancestral elephant lineage of the African Pliocene. It arrived at the Pleistocene glacial maxima equipped for them, in the way that a skilled mountaineer arrives at altitude already acclimatized. The cold-adapted hadrosaurs of the alternate world arrive at the Pleistocene glacial maxima in the same way, shaped by 30 million years of cooling since the Eocene-Oligocene boundary, carrying the accumulated adaptations of a lineage that has been under cold selection for most of its Cenozoic history. They are not struggling against the cold. They are, in the most precise evolutionary sense, made for it. This is the thing that tends to get lost in popular thinking about the relationship between animals and their environments. The ice did not arrive and surprise the mammoths. The mammoths were assembled by the approaching ice, generation by generation, over millions of years, so that by the time the ice was at its coldest and most extensive, the mammoths were as cold adapted as any terrestrial animal has ever been. Evolution tracks environmental change, slowly in geological terms, but inexorably, And given enough time, it produces creatures that are not merely tolerant of their environment, but expressions of it, as specific to their conditions as a key is specific to its lock. The great hadrosaur herds of the alternate Pleistocene steppe are expressions of the Pleistocene. They are what 63 million years of Cenozoic evolution, filtered through 30 million years of progressive cooling, makes of the Cretaceous hadrosaur template. They are not larger or smaller or more or less intelligent than they need to be. They are exactly what the alternate Pleistocene steppe requires them to be, in the ruthless economy of natural selection. And the creatures that hunt them are exactly what hunting them requires them to be. This is the beauty of evolutionary biology, and it is a beauty that the alternate world scenario brings into sharp relief. Because in our actual world, we tend to see mammals as the inevitable outcome, the obvious beneficiaries of the Cenozoic, the group that was always going to fill the post-dinosaur world with hoofed grazers and large predators and intelligent social hunters, and eventually with us. But the mammals were not inevitable. They were the ones. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. They were the ones that happened to be small and behaviorally flexible enough to survive the Cretaceous catastrophe, and then happened to have the physiological toolkit of full endothermy and live birth and lactation that proved highly advantageous in the changing Cenozoic climate. Given a different starting point, a different survivor of a different catastrophe, or no catastrophe at all, the same Cenozoic climate would have built the same ecological guilds, the large cold adapted grazers and the large pursuit predators, and the small intelligent generalists from whatever material was available. The material in the alternate world was dinosaurian. The result was different in its specifics and identical in its broad architecture. Because the broad architecture was not determined by the mammals, it was determined by the ice. The ice is the real protagonist of this story, not the dinosaurs and not the mammals and not the asteroid that changed which of them inherited the Cenozoic. The ice, building in Antarctica 34 million years ago, spreading into the northern hemisphere 3 million years ago, advancing and retreating on its 100,000-year orbital rhythm through the Pleistocene. The ice is the force that shaped everything that lived on this planet in the last 30 million years. The specific forms that adaptation took, the thick wool of the mammoth and the hollow crests of the hadrosaur, and the migratory routes of the caribou and the feeding ranges of the alternative steppe herds, these were written by the cold in the language of selection and time. The asteroid is the dramatic event. It is the sudden catastrophe, the moment of crisis, the geological instant that everything before or after is measured against. It is the reason our world is full of mammals rather than non-avian dinosaurs. But the asteroid only determined who was in the room when the ice arrived. It did not determine what the ice would make of whoever was there. That lesson, the lesson that the deep slow forces, the orbital cycles and the tectonic drift and the gradual chemistry of the atmosphere matter as much as the sudden catastrophes, is perhaps the most important thing this particular thought experiment teaches. We are not only the children of an asteroid, we are also the children of the ice, of the long cooling that began when Antarctica froze and continued through the Pleistocene glaciations that produced the cave painters and the mammoth hunters and the seafarers who crossed the Pacific and the farmers who first pressed seeds into the earth along the Fertile Crescent. Every human adaptation to cold, every cultural and physiological response to the demands of seasonal environments, every tool we made to survive winter, every story we told around a fire to pass the dark months, traces back to the same slow force that shaped the alternate hadrosaurs in their way and shaped us in ours. The ice made the world, both worlds, the real one and the imagined one that lives only in the long thought experiments of quiet nights, like this one. There is a quality that belongs to late nights and long thoughts, a quality of the mind softening its grip on certainty and allowing itself simply to feel the weight of what it has been considering. That is where we are now. Not at the end of a lecture or the close of an argument, but at the edge of something much older and much quieter than argument. The edge of deep time. The place where every story we tell about the past eventually arrives. The recognition that what happened is not simply past, but present in everything that followed it, including us. The asteroid struck. We know this. We have known it with full certainty since Luis and Walter Alvarez published their landmark findings on the iridium anomaly at the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary in 1980. We know the layer of clay, thin as a knife blade, that marks the boundary in rock outcrops all over the world. We know the shocked quartz and the glass spherules and the osmium ratios that point unmistakably to an impact of extraordinary violence. We know the crater, the Chicxulub structure buried under the Yucatan Peninsula, and the Gulf of Mexico floor, identified by Glenn Penfield and Antonio Camargo in the 1980s, and confirmed through subsequent drilling and geophysical work. We know the consequence: 3/4 of all species on Earth gone, the great non-avian dinosaurs among them, within a geological instant. The world was filled with them on one day, and within 100,000 years, they were bones in rock. But knowing a thing happened does not remove the strangeness of it having nearly not happened. The impactor was moving through the solar system for millions of years before it arrived. Its path was determined by the gravitational interactions of planets and moons and the sun itself, playing out across astronomical time with perfect mechanical precision. There was never a moment of choice in its trajectory. And yet the specificity of what that trajectory produced, the specific rock hitting the specific target at the specific angle and the specific time, and producing the specific extinction, and that extinction producing the specific evolutionary vacuum that the specific mammalian lineages filled in the specific ways that eventually produced the specific primate that eventually became you. This chain of specificity is so long and so improbable at each link that sitting with it for even a moment can produce something close to vertigo. You are the consequence of a rock that happened to be in a particular place, following a particular path, meeting the particular rotation of a planet at a particular moment. 66 million years ago. You are that improbable, and so is every living thing that exists alongside you. The oak tree outside a window, the crow on a wire, the dog at someone's feet. All of them improbable in exactly the same way. All of them carrying in their DNA, the unbroken thread of survivorship that runs from the chaos of the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary to this quiet room, this quiet night. The creatures we have been imagining tonight, the feathered theropods of the alternate Pleistocene, the cold-adapted hadrosaurs migrating across the periglacial steppe, the intelligent dromaeosaurid-descended hunters caching food under alternate Oligocene snow, they never existed. They are extrapolations and reasoned guesses, informed by fossil evidence and evolutionary biology, but always fundamentally imaginative. They live only in thought experiments, and in the kind of late-night wandering that long documentary scripts are designed to invite. And yet they are not arbitrary. They are not fantasy in the sense of being unconstrained. They are constrained by everything we know about how evolution works, about how climate shapes animals, about what deep time does to a lineage when that lineage is subjected to persistent selective pressure. They are what might have been, grounded in the bones and chemistry and geology of what was. The world that actually emerged from the Cretaceous catastrophe is, in its own way, no less extraordinary than the imagined alternate. The mammals that filled the vacated niches did so with extraordinary speed and creativity. The early Paleocene, the first million years after the impact, is a record of biological experimentation without parallel in the history of life. New body forms, new feeding strategies, new social structures appearing and disappearing and reappearing as the survivors of the extinction sorted themselves into the ecological opportunities the empty world presented. The early condylarths that gave rise to the ungulates, the early primates moving into the forest canopy, the early carnivorous mammals sorting into the niches that saber-toothed and dire wolves and cave hyenas would eventually occupy. All of it driven by the same engine that drove the imagined dinosaurian diversification of the alternate timeline, the combination of ecological opportunity and environmental pressure acting on genetic variation over time. The story of life on Earth is not a story of stable order occasionally interrupted by disaster. It is a story of constant change, punctuated by crises that, devastating as they are, consistently produce new richness in their aftermath. The Permian extinction, 252 million years ago, killed perhaps 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species, and was followed by one of the most explosive diversifications in the history of complex animal life. The Cretaceous extinction was followed by 66 million years of mammalian creativity that eventually produced us. The pattern repeats because it reflects something true about how biological systems work. Catastrophe empties niches. Empty niches invite experimentation. Experimentation produces novelty, and novelty, given time, becomes the new normal. We are the new normal of 66 million years ago. We are what experimentation and time made out of the aftermath of disaster. And the creatures of the imagined alternate world are what experimentation and time might have made out of a different aftermath. An aftermath that began not with catastrophe, but with the slower, more patient pressure of the advancing ice. Cold has always been one of evolution's most creative forces. The Pleistocene ice ages of actual Earth history produced the woolly mammoth, and the woolly rhinoceros, and the cave bear, and the Arctic fox, and the snowy owl, and the polar bear, and the sled dog, and the reindeer. They produced the cold-adapted humans who painted the caves of Lascaux and Altamira, who crafted the Venus of Willendorf, who buried their dead with red ochre and grave goods in ceremonies whose meaning we can only guess at from the shapes they left in the rock. The ice was not just a destroyer, it was a sculptor. It cut away everything that could not endure, and what remained was hardened and specific and beautiful in the way that necessity makes things beautiful. In the alternate world, the ice performed the same function on a different cast of creatures. It cut away the comfortable and the generalized, and left the specific and the hardy. It produced hadrosaurs that could breathe at -40, and theropods that could hunt through meters of snow, and small intelligent feathered hunters that remembered and planned and learned. The ice was the same ice. The Milankovitch cycles ran the same orbital mathematics. The Drake Passage opened and isolated Antarctica at the same time. The same cold descended on a different world and did what cold always does. It made the world stronger in the places where it was already strong, and it took away everything that had been merely comfortable. We look at our own Pleistocene ancestors, the early Homo lineages that spread out of Africa into the cold north, and we see exactly this. The cold was not simply a challenge they overcame. It was the force that shaped them into what they became. The demands of surviving an ice age winter, finding food under snow, maintaining body heat with fire and clothing and communal warmth, thinking ahead to spring, storing knowledge across generations because forgetting a solution that worked last winter might mean death this winter. These demands produced the large-brained, language-equipped, culture-building creature that eventually walked out of the Pleistocene and into the Holocene and built everything that followed. The ice made us, just as in the alternate world, it would have made them. There is a kind of kinship in this, if you let yourself feel it. A kinship not between species, not between the actual and the imagined, but between the process. The same force, the same cold, the same grinding patience of glaciation, working on different materials to produce different forms of complexity. There is something moving about that universality, something that says the story of life is bigger than any single telling of it, bigger than the actual history of our Earth, big enough to contain all the histories that might have been and never were. Tonight, you have been somewhere that does not exist. You have walked, in the imagination, through forests of the alternate Eocene, where feathered theropods move between ancient trees that also grew in our own past. You have stood, in thought, on the alternate Pleistocene steppe, as a herd of cold-adapted hadrosaurs passed in the blue winter light, their breath rising in great clouds, their flanks shaggy with the insulation 60 million years of cold had given them. You have glimpsed, at the edge of thought, the distant possibility of something intelligent in those alternate high latitudes. Something that remembered and planned and wondered, without being human, without being us. You have been 66 million years away from any human footprint, and you have followed a path that never existed, through a world that never was, to a Pleistocene that contained our planet's ice and none of our kind. And now, you are coming back. Back through the long corridors of alternate time, back past the alternate Miocene forests, and the alternate Oligocene steppes, and the alternate Eocene warmth. Back across the 66 million year gap to the actual moment. The one where the rock arrived after all, where the sky over Yucatan turned to fire, where the darkness came. And from that darkness, slowly, the actual world assembled itself. The small and the feathered and the furred and the quick, the primates in the canopy, the early hoofed animals on the plain, the long Paleocene recovery, the Eocene warmth, the Oligocene chill, the Miocene grasslands, the Pliocene hominins, the Pleistocene ice, the caves and the fire and the ochre and the story, you, lying still, breathing slowly, on a night in the present, which is the accumulation of all the nights that came before it, all the way back to the night 66 million years ago when the last Triceratops walked through a world it did not know was about to end. Rest now. The ice ages are over for tonight. The imagined theropods have gone back to their alternate forests. The actual world, the one that emerged from the asteroid's aftermath, and the mammal's rise and the primate's long patient evolution, waits outside your window, going about its ordinary work. An owl calling in the dark, wind in the leaves, the small sounds of the world being itself, this specific world, the only one that actually exists, carrying the long, improbable thread of survival forward into another morning. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. See you on the next one.